The worst mistake I ever made wasn't in business, it wasn't in war. It was 7 words I said to the woman who loved me. The rain had been falling since dawn, a cold October rain that turned the cemetery paths into ribbons of dark mud and painted the gray sky with a sadness that felt almost personal. I stood beneath a black umbrella and stared at the marble headstone in front of me. Evelyn Moretti, beloved wife, beloved daughter, beloved friend. The words were carved so neatly, so permanently, as if the stone itself had accepted a truth that I still couldn't. Around me, people whispered in low voices. Family members, friends, people who had known her far better than I ever deserved to. Some cried openly. Others stood in silence with their heads bowed. But nobody approached me. Nobody knew what to say to a man who had everything and still lost the only thing that mattered. The roses in my hand were white. They had been her favorite. Every Friday for 8 years, I brought her white roses. It had started as a joke after our first date. She told me red roses were too dramatic and white roses felt honest. Back then, I laughed. Back then, I thought I understood her. Now I realized I never truly did. A gust of wind swept across the cemetery, carrying the scent of wet grass and distant pine trees. The petals trembled in my grip. My fingers trembled, too. That surprised me. My hands never shook. Not during negotiations, not during crises, not even during the darkest nights of my life. But today was different. Today there was nowhere to hide, no deal to make, no problem to solve. Just a name carved into stone and a silence that felt louder than thunder. I lowered myself slowly onto one knee and placed the flowers at the base of the grave. Water dripped from my dark coat. The cold soaked through the fabric. But I barely noticed. My attention stayed fixed on the date beneath her name. 29 years. That was all she got. 29 years to laugh, 29 years to dream, 29 years to love a man who didn't deserve it. I swallowed hard. The lump in my throat refused to move. A few feet away, a priest spoke softly to the gathered crowd. I couldn't hear most of his words. They blended together with the rain. Mercy, faith, peace, none of them felt real. Because peace wasn't standing beside a grave. Peace wasn't waking up every morning and remembering she was gone. Peace wasn't hearing her voice in every empty room of the house we built together. The ceremony ended slowly. One by one, people began leaving. Cars disappeared through the cemetery gates. Umbrellas folded. Footsteps faded. Eventually, only 2 people remained, me and the grave. The silence settled heavily around us. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat and pulled out a folded envelope. The edges were worn from being handled too many times. My thumb brushed across the front. My name was written there in Evelyn's handwriting, Adrian. Just Adrian. No titles, no distance, no anger. She had written it weeks before everything changed. Weeks before the words that shattered her heart. Weeks before she walked away. I had carried the letter every day since the funeral. Yet I had never opened it, not once, because some part of me was terrified of what it might say, terrified that her final words would be kinder than I deserved. The rain intensified. Tiny drops tapped against the paper. I stared at the envelope for a long moment. Then I looked back at the grave. "I'm sorry," I whispered. My voice cracked. The sound barely existed. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn." The wind answered with silence. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 6 months, I allowed myself to remember the night everything began to fall apart. The night she smiled at me across a candlelit table. The night I opened my mouth and destroyed both of our lives. I remember that evening with a clarity that feels like punishment. 6 months before the funeral. 6 months before the grave. 6 months before I learned that regret can follow a man like a shadow he can never outrun. The sun was setting beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse overlooking Manhattan. Gold light spilled across the hardwood floors and painted everything in warmth. The city looked beautiful from up there. Endless towers, endless lights, endless proof that power could build almost anything. Almost. I loosened my tie as I stepped through the front door and immediately caught the smell of garlic, rosemary, and fresh bread. Home. Real home. Not the office. Not the meetings. Not the endless responsibilities waiting outside those walls. Evelyn stood in the kitchen arranging candles on the dining table. Her blonde hair fell over one shoulder. She wore a simple cream-colored sweater and jeans. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress anyone. Somehow she was still the most beautiful thing in the room. She looked up when she heard me enter. That smile appeared instantly. The same smile that had somehow survived 8 years of marriage to a man who rarely deserved it. "You are early," she said, "by 11 minutes. I glanced at my watch and laughed softly. "You counted? I always count." Her voice carried a teasing warmth that made something inside me relax. For a moment, the weight on my shoulders eased. The stress, the pressure, the constant demands. All of it seemed farther away when she smiled at me like that. I crossed the room and kissed her forehead. "What is all this?" I asked. "Dinner." I can see that. A special dinner. She bit her lower lip slightly, almost as if she was trying to hide excitement. Looking back now, I should have noticed. I should have seen what was right in front of me. But I was distracted. My phone had not stopped vibrating all afternoon. Problems needed solving. Decisions needed making. Deadlines needed meeting. The world never stopped asking for more. Adrian, she said gently, can you put your phone away tonight? I looked at the screen again. 3 missed calls, 2 urgent messages, another email waiting. Just for a little while, she added. Please. I hesitated. That hesitation lasted only a second. Yet somehow it became one of the moments I would replay thousands of times later. I silenced the phone and placed it face down on the counter. Her smile widened. Thank you. We sat together at the table as the city lights slowly came alive beyond the windows. Candles flickered between us. Soft jazz played from a speaker in the corner. It should have been perfect. Maybe it was. Maybe that is what makes the memory hurt so much now. We talked about ordinary things at first. A bookstore she had visited, a stray dog she wanted to adopt, a coffee shop she thought I would like, little pieces of her day, little gifts she offered me that I accepted without fully appreciating. Halfway through dinner, she became quieter, nervous. Her fingers wrapped around her wine glass, but she did not drink. What is it? I finally asked. She looked down for a second, then back at me. Her blue eyes seemed brighter than usual, hopeful somehow. I have been waiting all day to tell you something. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Tell me. Her smile returned, smaller this time, more vulnerable. I think this might be the beginning of something wonderful. I frowned slightly. Confused, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, warm, steady, full of trust. Adrian, she whispered, I think we should start talking about having a family. The room became very still. Even now I can remember the exact expression on her face. The hope, the excitement, the future she was already imagining. And I remember something else. The vibration of my phone suddenly breaking the silence. One call, then another, and without realizing it, I made the worst choice of my life. I looked away from her and toward the screen. The screen kept lighting up every few seconds. White letters, red notifications, problems demanding attention, people needing answers, people needing me. I stared at the phone longer than I should have, long enough to miss the way Evelyn's smile began to fade, long enough to make her withdraw her hand from mine. The city lights reflected against the glass behind her, turning her silhouette into something fragile and distant. You do not seem surprised, she said softly. I forced a smile. I am surprised. Are you? The question landed harder than it should have. I reached for my wine glass. Evelyn, it is just unexpected. She nodded slowly. I know. Another vibration rattled against the countertop, then another. I could almost feel my patience slipping away. The past few months had been relentless. Every day brought another complication. Another demand, another responsibility. I had been sleeping 4 hours a night if I was lucky. I had convinced myself that exhaustion justified everything. Looking back now, I realize exhaustion is not an excuse. It is only a warning sign you ignore until it is too late. Evelyn looked down at her plate. I have spent weeks thinking about this conversation. Weeks? Maybe longer. Her smile returned briefly, but there was sadness hiding behind it now. I wanted it to be perfect. Guilt brushed against me. I ignored it. My phone vibrated again. Louder this time, more insistent. I grabbed it without thinking. One glance at the screen became 2. 2 became 20 seconds. 20 seconds became a wall between us. Adrian, I looked up. Her voice was calm, too calm. Can you put it away? I exhaled heavily. Just give me 1 minute. You said that 20 minutes ago. I rubbed my forehead. You know how things are right now. I always know how things are. The room fell silent. The jazz music continued playing softly in the background. Somewhere below us, Manhattan buzzed with life. Horns, traffic, people rushing toward places they believed mattered. None of it felt important anymore. Not when I remember what happened next. Evelyn folded her hands together. Do you even want this conversation? Of course I do. Then be here. The words should have stopped me. They should have shaken me awake. Instead, irritation flared inside my chest. Irritation born from stress, from pressure, from carrying too much for too long. I am here. No, her eyes met mine. You are not. Something sharp entered her voice for the first time all evening. Not anger, disappointment. Somehow that hurt more. I spend every night eating dinner alone. She looked toward the empty chair beside me. I spend weekends wondering whether you will actually come home. Her gaze returned to mine. And when you finally do, you bring the entire world with you. I pushed my chair back slightly. That is not fair. Fair? She laughed quietly. The sound broke my heart now when I remember it. I am not asking for fair, Adrian. I am asking for you. Another notification flashed across the screen. Another interruption, another distraction, and suddenly something inside me snapped. Not because of her, because of everything. The pressure, the expectations, the constant noise. I stood up too quickly. My chair scraped against the floor. "Do you think any of this is easy for me?" I asked. Her expression changed immediately. Shock, then hurt. "I did not say it was. You want more time, more attention, more of me." My voice rose despite myself. "Everybody wants something from me. I am your wife, and maybe that is the problem." The words escaped before I could stop them. The second they left my mouth, I wanted them back. But it was already too late. Evelyn froze, completely still. Her eyes searched my face as if she was waiting for me to explain, to take it back, to tell her she misunderstood. Instead, I kept talking. The worst mistake of my life was not one sentence. It was every sentence that followed. And when I finally looked at her again, I realized the light in her eyes was gone. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The city continued shining beyond the windows. The candles continued burning. The music continued playing. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet somehow nothing was. Evelyn stared at me as if she no longer recognized the man sitting across from her. Maybe she did not. Maybe I did not recognize myself either. "What did you just say?" she asked quietly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I should have apologized immediately. I should have sat back down and taken her hand. I should have told her that stress was talking and not my heart. Instead, I doubled down. Pride is a strange thing. It convinces you that winning an argument matters more than protecting the person you love. "You heard me," I said. The moment the words left my mouth, I saw something change behind her eyes. Not anger, not even sadness, something worse. Acceptance. She lowered her gaze to the table and nodded once, slowly, thoughtfully, as if she was finally understanding a truth she had been avoiding for a long time. See, the room felt colder. "Evelyn, no." She lifted a hand gently. "Do not explain. That is not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out, because I did not have an answer. Not one that made sense. Not one that justified the damage I had already done. Her eyes glistened in the candlelight, but she refused to let the tears fall. That was who she was. Strong in ways most people never noticed. Strong in quiet ways. Strong when nobody was watching. "I spent years believing that if I loved you enough, eventually you would let me all the way in," she said softly. "I thought one day you would stop carrying everything alone." My chest tightened. "Evelyn, I was willing to wait." She smiled sadly. "I was willing to wait forever." The words hurt because they were true. She had waited. Through late nights, through canceled vacations, through anniversaries interrupted by phone calls, through every promise I postponed until tomorrow. I stood up and walked toward her. "I am tired," I said. "That is all this is." She looked up at me. "No, Adrian. Being tired does not create words like that." Silence filled the space between us. Heavy, uncomfortable, honest. Eventually, she pushed back her chair and stood. For a moment, I thought she was going to leave the room. Instead, she walked to the window overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched toward the horizon. She stared at them quietly. "Do you know what is funny?" she asked. "I used to stand here every night when you were gone." I remained still. I would look at all those lights and wonder which one belonged to you. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass. "I always told myself you were working so hard because you loved us." My throat tightened. "I do love us." She closed her eyes briefly. "Then why do I feel so alone?" I had no answer. None that mattered. Minutes passed. Finally, she turned away from the window. Her expression was calm now. Too calm. "I think I am going to go upstairs. Evelyn, good night, Adrian." She walked past me. Her shoulder brushed mine lightly. The contact lasted less than a second. Somehow it felt like goodbye. I listened to her footsteps disappear toward the staircase. Then the house became silent, completely silent. The dinner sat untouched on the table. Candles flickered lower. Wax slowly dripped onto silver holders. My phone vibrated again. I looked at the screen. Then I looked toward the staircase. For the first time all evening, I ignored the call. But when I finally went upstairs an hour later, her side of the bed was empty. And resting on her pillow was a small white envelope with my name written across the front. I stared at the envelope for nearly a minute before picking it up. The house felt different, quieter, as if something important had already left and the walls knew it before I did. My name was written across the front in Evelyn's neat handwriting. Adrian. Nothing else. No heart, no smiley face, no trace of the warmth she usually tucked into everything she touched. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in half. My hands hesitated before unfolding it. Even then, some part of me knew I was about to cross a line that could not be uncrossed. The letter was short, far too short. "Adrian, I think we both need time to breathe." Tonight made me realize that I have been holding on to a version of us that may not exist anymore. I am not angry. I am tired. I love you enough to stop forcing you to carry a future you no longer want. Please do not look for me, Evelyn. That was it. 8 years together reduced to 6 sentences. I read them again, then again. The words never changed. Around midnight, I called her phone, straight to voicemail. I called again, the same result. I told myself she was staying with a friend. I told myself she needed space. I told myself everything would be fine tomorrow. People say lies become dangerous when you tell them to others. The truth is, they become far more dangerous when you tell them to yourself. The next morning, her side of the closet was half empty. A few dresses remained, some shoes, a sweater she loved, enough to make it look temporary, enough to help me keep lying to myself. Days passed. Then a week. I buried myself in work, meetings, contracts, endless responsibilities. Whenever someone asked about Evelyn, I gave the same answer. She is visiting family. She needed a break. She will be back soon. I repeated it so often that eventually I almost believed it. Almost. Every evening I returned to the penthouse and noticed something else missing. Her favorite coffee mug remained untouched beside the espresso machine. The novel she had been reading stayed open on the nightstand. Fresh flowers stopped appearing in the kitchen because she was always the one who remembered to buy them. The silence grew heavier each day. One night I opened the refrigerator and found a container labeled for Adrian. Inside was homemade soup she had prepared before leaving. I stood there staring at the label for nearly 10 minutes. The handwriting hit harder than the words in the letter. Another week passed, then another. Her phone remained off. Her social media accounts stayed inactive. Nobody seemed to know where she was, or if they did, they were protecting her. Part of me admired that. Another part hated it. Late one evening, I found myself standing in her art room, a room I had entered perhaps 3 times in 8 years. Sunlight no longer touched the canvases because darkness had already fallen outside. Half-finished paintings leaned against the walls. Sketchbooks filled entire shelves. Evidence of a life she built quietly while I was busy building mine. I picked up a sketchbook and opened it randomly. The first drawing was of the 2 of us sitting on a park bench years ago. The second was our wedding dance. The third showed me sleeping on a plane with my head tilted awkwardly against the window. She had drawn hundreds of moments I barely remembered living. My chest tightened, because suddenly I understood something terrifying. Evelyn had spent years paying attention to me, and I had spent years assuming she would always be there. My phone rang, breaking the silence. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the caller ID, unknown number. I answered immediately. A woman's voice came through the line, professional, calm. "Is this Adrienne Moretti?" Yes. There was a pause, just long enough for dread to begin spreading through my chest. "Mr. Moretti, I am calling regarding your wife, Evelyn." My grip tightened around the phone. Every sound in the room seemed to disappear at once. The city outside, the hum of the air conditioner, even my own breathing. "What about my wife?" I asked. The woman on the line hesitated. "My name is Dr. Rebecca Lawson. I am calling from St. Anne Medical Center in Boston." Boston. The word meant nothing to me at first. Then dread began spreading through my chest like cold water. "Is she all right?" Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Moretti, your wife listed you as her emergency contact, but she specifically requested that we not contact you unless certain circumstances changed." My stomach dropped. "What circumstances?" "I believe this conversation would be better in person." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Tell me now." Papers shifted on the other end of the call. I could hear the doctor choosing her words carefully. "Your wife has been receiving treatment for a serious cardiac condition." I stopped breathing. "What?" The room tilted slightly. I sat down before my knees could make the decision for me. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake." Her voice softened. "She has been under our care for several months." "Several months?" I closed my eyes. "Several months while I was working, while I was arguing, while I was convincing myself she had simply needed space. Evelyn had been sitting in hospital rooms, alone. Why did nobody tell me?" My voice barely sounded like my own. "She did not want you informed." The answer hit harder than anything else. Not because she hid the illness, because she believed she had to. I stared across the room toward one of her unfinished paintings leaning against the wall, a landscape she never finished coloring. Suddenly, every memory felt different. Every conversation, every smile, every moment I thought I understood. "How serious is it?" I asked. Silence answered first. Then the doctor spoke quietly. "Serious enough that she has undergone multiple procedures over the past few months." I lowered my head into my hands. The image shattered me. Evelyn sitting in waiting rooms. Evelyn signing forms. Evelyn hearing frightening medical words from strangers. Evelyn facing all of it without me. Because when she needed reassurance, I gave her doubt. When she needed comfort, I gave her distance. When she needed love, I gave her a reason to leave. "Why are you calling now?" I whispered. The doctor's voice grew gentler. "Because she authorized us to release her records this morning." My heart skipped. "Why?" Another pause. Mr. Moretti, I believe she wanted you to finally know the truth. After the call ended, I sat motionless for a long time. Darkness slowly filled the penthouse around me. The city lights blinked beyond the windows like distant stars. Eventually, a courier arrived carrying a sealed package. Medical records, test results, appointment schedules, documents spanning months. I opened them with shaking hands. Page after page revealed a life I never knew existed. There were treatment dates that matched nights I had worked late. Specialist consultations that happened while I sat in boardrooms. Follow-up appointments scheduled during weekends I had canceled plans with her. Then I found something else. A handwritten notebook tucked between the documents. Evelyn's journal. My chest tightened immediately. The first page contained only a single sentence. If Adrian ever reads this, it means I ran out of time to tell him myself. I stared at those words until they blurred. Then I turned the page. And what I discovered there would change everything I thought I knew about the woman I loved. My hands shook as I turned the next page. Evelyn's handwriting filled the paper with the same careful elegance I had seen on birthday cards, grocery lists, and little notes she used to leave beside my coffee cup. But this felt different, more intimate, more final. The first entry was dated 3 months before she left. I read every word twice. Adrian has been working late again. He apologized tonight. I told him it was okay. The truth is, I do not mind the long hours nearly as much as I mind watching him carry the weight of the world alone. Sometimes I wish he could see himself the way I do. Not powerful, not feared, just tired. My vision blurred. I turned the page. Another entry. Then another. None of them contained anger. None of them contained resentment. Somehow that hurt the most. She wrote about ordinary things. The flowers she planted on the terrace. The movies she wanted us to watch together. The restaurant she hoped we would visit someday in Maine. Tiny dreams, tiny moments, a life happening quietly beside mine while I was too distracted to notice. Then I reached an entry dated 1 week before our argument. I stopped breathing as I read it. The doctor confirmed the diagnosis today. I sat in my car for 40 minutes afterward because I could not figure out how to drive home. I wanted to tell Adrian immediately. I almost called him 3 times. But every time I imagined his face, I remembered how exhausted he has been lately. I do not want my illness to become another burden he carries, a burden. That was how she saw herself, not as my wife, not as the person I loved most. A burden. I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest. The shame was unbearable. Sometime after midnight, I booked a flight to Boston. I barely remember packing. I barely remember getting to the airport. For the first time in years, deadlines did not matter. Meetings did not matter. Money did not matter. Nothing mattered except finding Evelyn. The next morning, I sat across from Dr. Lawson in a small office overlooking the hospital courtyard. Rain tapped softly against the windows. She reviewed files while I stared at the empty chair beside me. Where is she? I asked for what felt like the 10th time. The doctor's expression grew complicated. She completed treatment here several weeks ago. Hope surged through me. Then she is okay? Her condition improved significantly. Relief crashed into me so hard I nearly laughed. Then I noticed the sadness in the doctor's eyes. But, I asked. She folded her hands. She declined to leave a forwarding address. The relief vanished instantly. You have to know where she went. I am sorry. She shook her head gently. Patient privacy laws prevent me from sharing information I do not have. Frustration burned through me, not at her, at myself. Because if I had been paying attention months earlier, I would not be sitting here begging strangers for answers. The doctor reached into a drawer and removed a sealed envelope. She left this with us. My heart hammered. For me, she nodded. Only if you came looking. I stared at the envelope. My name appeared across the front in Evelyn's handwriting. Again, always my name. I took it carefully. The paper felt impossibly light, yet somehow heavier than anything I had ever held. Did she say anything else? I asked quietly. Dr. Lawson thought for a moment. Then she smiled sadly. Only one thing. My chest tightened. What was it? The doctor looked directly at me. She said, if you ever came searching, it would mean you finally heard what she had been trying to tell you all along. I did not open the envelope until I returned to the hotel. Somehow I was afraid of it. Afraid of another goodbye hidden inside a few sheets of paper. Outside, Boston was wrapped in rain. Water slid down the window of my room while traffic lights reflected across the wet streets below. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at Evelyn's handwriting. Every letter felt familiar. Every curve of ink reminded me of the life I had nearly destroyed with my own carelessness. Finally, I broke the seal. Inside was a single folded page. The paper trembled slightly in my hands as I unfolded it. Adrian, if you are reading this, then you came looking for me. I hope that means you are taking care of yourself. I hope you are sleeping more. I hope you finally replaced that terrible coffee machine you refused to throw away. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. A broken laugh. Because even now she was worrying about me. My eyes continued scanning the page. I never wanted you to find out about my condition this way. I wanted to tell you over dinner one night. I imagined sitting across from you and holding your hand while we figured everything out together. But somewhere along the way, I stopped believing there was room for my fears inside your life. The words hit like a punch to the chest. I closed my eyes briefly. She had felt alone long before she left. Long before that dinner. Long before those terrible words. I forced myself to keep reading. This is not your fault, Adrian. I need you to believe that. Life is complicated. People are complicated. Love is complicated. But if there is one thing I know for certain, it is that loving you was never a mistake. My vision blurred completely. I lowered the letter and stared at the floor. The room felt too small. The silence felt unbearable. Loving you was never a mistake. After everything, after the loneliness, after the disappointment, after all the nights I chose work over her, she still wrote those words. I continued reading through tears I could no longer hide. There was one final paragraph near the bottom. If we never see each other again, I need you to promise me something. Do not spend your life punishing yourself. Find reasons to laugh, find reasons to hope. And when you see the ocean, think of me, because it was always my favorite place to dream. The letter ended there. No address, no clue, no explanation, only a memory. The ocean. I sat frozen for a long time. Then something clicked inside my mind, a conversation from years earlier. We had spent a weekend driving along the coast of Maine. Evelyn had fallen in love with a small seaside town called Harbor's Point. She talked about it constantly afterward. The quiet beaches, the lighthouse, the tiny bookstores, the cottages overlooking the water. She once told me she wanted to disappear there someday if life ever became too loud. My heart began pounding. It was the first real lead I had, the first thread connecting me to her. Within an hour, I was back at the airport. The next morning, I arrived in Harbor's Point beneath gray skies and salty ocean air. Waves rolled against the rocky shoreline. Seagulls circled overhead. The entire town looked exactly like the photographs Evelyn used to show me. Beautiful, peaceful, alive. I spent the entire day searching cafes, inns, shops, galleries. Nobody recognized her photograph. Nobody remembered seeing her. By sunset, hope had begun slipping away. I stood alone near the lighthouse watching the ocean crash gently against the rocks below. The wind carried the scent of salt and rain. I reached into my coat and unfolded her letter once more. That was when something slipped free from between the pages and drifted toward the ground. A receipt, folded so tightly I had missed it before. My pulse quickened. Across the top was the name of a small coastal clinic located less than 3 miles from where I stood. The clinic sat at the edge of the shoreline where the road curved toward the sea. White siding, blue shutters, a small garden swaying in the wind. Nothing about it looked extraordinary, yet my hands trembled as I climbed the front steps. Because for the first time in months, hope felt real. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. I showed her the receipt. I showed her Evelyn's photograph. At first she hesitated. Then something softened in her expression. "You are Adrian," she said quietly. My heart nearly stopped. "You know her?" The woman nodded. "Everyone here knows her." Relief crashed through me so suddenly that I had to grip the counter to stay steady. "Where is she?" The receptionist glanced toward a window overlooking the ocean. "She comes here 3 days a week." I followed her gaze. Beyond the glass stood a small cottage perched above the shoreline. Weathered wood, a wraparound porch, wildflowers growing along the path. My chest tightened. "Is she there now?" The woman smiled gently. "She never misses the sunset." I do not remember leaving the clinic. I only remember running. The ocean wind pushed against my coat as I followed the narrow path toward the cottage. Every step felt impossible. Every heartbeat louder than the crashing waves below. What if she did not want to see me? What if I was too late? What if all I had left were apologies that could never repair the damage? The questions followed me all the way to the porch. Then I saw her. She sat in a wooden chair facing the ocean. A blanket draped across her shoulders. Her blonde hair moved softly in the wind. For a moment I simply stood there, unable to breathe, unable to move. Because after months of searching, after months of regret, she was real. Not a memory, not a photograph, not a name written in a journal, real, alive. Evelyn turned slightly as if sensing someone behind her. Her eyes met mine. The world stopped. Neither of us spoke. The ocean continued rolling toward the shore. The wind continued whispering through the grass. Yet everything else disappeared. I saw surprise cross her face first, then disbelief, then something gentler, something that looked dangerously close to hope. "Adrian," my name sounded different in her voice. Fragile, careful, like something she was afraid to break. I swallowed hard. "Hi, brilliant." After months of searching, that was the best I could manage. A small laugh escaped her. The sound nearly shattered me. I had missed that laugh more than I realized. "What are you doing here?" she asked softly. I took a step closer, then another, looking for my wife. Tears gathered in her eyes immediately. Mine were not far behind. "You found her." I nodded. "Eventually." She looked toward the ocean for a moment. "You were not supposed to." "I know. I left because I thought it was what you wanted." The words hurt because they were true. I lowered myself beside her chair. For the first time in my life, I did not care about pride. I did not care about appearances. I only cared about honesty. "The worst mistake I ever made was making you believe that." Her eyes closed briefly. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Adrian?" "No." My voice shook. "Please let me say this." I reached into my coat and removed the letter she left behind months ago. The one I carried every day. I read every word. She stared at it silently. "You said loving me was never a mistake." My throat tightened. "But making you feel alone was mine." The sunset painted the ocean gold. Waves reflected light like liquid fire. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Evelyn reached for my hand. The same hand she had offered across a candlelit table months earlier. This time I did not look away. I held it tightly, carefully, like something precious. Because now I finally understood what she had been trying to tell me all along. Some people spend their lives chasing power. Others chase success. I had chased both. Yet neither one could compare to the woman sitting beside me watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon. And as her fingers intertwined with mine, I realized redemption is not about undoing the past. It is about becoming the person someone believed you could be before you believed it yourself.